I'm so sorry.
Almost tall is not playing.
Pick one living fossil.
Seriously?
No, I made a mistake. It was an accident.
Are you there?
I picked Wayne.
Accident the game. I did not.
You know what, man?
Did you pick me?
It was an accident.
Well, I am no accident.
He said green. I thought that was green.
I am no accident.
Wait, is that green? Are you green? Oh, we all failed?
The game.
We can't see. Come over here, guys. Get over here. Yeah, Andre, you have to sit down.
We can't see.
I'm glad my name's not on that one.
Green. Wow. There's a cloud. No, a cloud? Cloud donut? I know it's cloud!
Sit down.
I am sitting down.
I'm actually
Sitting on me, sit down. I'm sitting Japanese style.
Sit
on your butt.
Right here. This one.
Cake is not a donut. It is.
Surprising. Okay.
We're in second place, Ezra. We're in second place? Look, in 1938, fishermen caught a koala. Scientists thought that this had gone extinct. How am I supposed to remember this? Before dinosaurs evolved. Why is it off? Before dinosaurs evolved, it's red. Red! Yeah, but we were super late. We were super duper late. Are we winning? No, we're not. Green. That is a Turkish sloth. Oh, it's a Russian armadillo. Wait, green. I did already. Oh, you did it. You know what, guys? Don't listen. You're the last person. I need a pillow. Give me a pillow.
Darn it.
Hey, we're winning. We're winning?
I think so.
No, we are in last place. Move. We're not in last place. Have faith.
No, we got fourth.
Ha ha! We're almost in last place.
Oh, yeah.
You guys need to turn into donuts.
What, Dave?
We're about to win now! We are so low. We're 1,000 away. We're 1,000 away.
Very surprising.
Fire put.
I'm just like, let's do red. We gotta do
I'm glad you didn't put my face for that name.
Philostratus! They're all correct. Oh. You got it correct. Yeah, baby. Yeah. Wrong.
That's a baby desert.
Why would he? Why? Is that a donut made of sprouts? It's not iron, you weirdo. It's vitamin A! You loser! You were gonna put iron. No, I wasn't. Yeah, you were. You were cooking iron. Because they thought it was a bagel. You were made on a stick, like the bread. No, I seen them make it on a stick.
Yeah, that's different.
Donuts or donuts? You know on a stick too. Remember the dude on iCarly? He came around with the bagels on the stick?
No, it's not bagel.
No, Bizarre was about 8 cubits. 510 cubits.
pylons and they're gonna like fill it under the pit. So when you suck exploded. So you actually like go out and
No, we got it. I only got one.
Look at your phone.
I've seen the finished thing, it looks just like this. Minus all the animals. Winner is.
Moment of truth.
Team day!
iPhone's in the bottom.
I don't care. I like it.
Alex, you should have stayed with us if you won.
Finish it off.
Hey, Chloe, good job with a healthy third, but you can't beat first.
You're third.
Don't get you hurt, but stop you.
Alright, now I can. Now I won't have a hurt butt. Don't let her.
Walk upstairs and
I don't want her belly.
What is going on over there?
oh my goodness, I'm trying to take you.
Yeah, you know, just so days. You guys just take it past the room.
I did not want it. I was dragging you that I just saw.
What did you do?
Alright,
welcome. One and all, the Dinos, Dragons, and Donuts Week 3. If you have been missing out on Dinos, Dragons, and Donuts Week 1 and 2, fear not. It is up on YouTube. Check it out, YouTube/C/Daniel Cuneo 530. I know it's stupid, but that's what I have to live with. So, we've been here for 3 weeks now, doing our dinosaur study through history, looking at science and how it lines up with the Bible. If you guys have not been here the whole time, like I said, you can catch up on YouTube. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Or if you want to, you can actually get these handouts from week 1 and week 2. If you go on the church calendar, I know that's really weird, but go back on the church calendar to week 1's calendar entry and week 2's calendar entry, and it'll actually have links to the handouts and the YouTube videos on the calendar. I'm OCD and I have to go back in time and alter events so that they have all the information on them. It's just me. So anyways, yeah, that's it. We're going to start our video and we'll have our discussion afterward. So be sure to keep track of your questions. If you need to, you can always grab a pencil right here from the Bible bookshelf. You have a cup of pencils and a pencil sharpener. You want to scribble down questions and stuff. But the handouts are there for you guys as kind of pre-taken notes. Almost everything in the entire video is covered in short form, kind of a summary on those handouts. If there is a question you come up with, though, that's when the pencils can come in super duper handy. So then you don't have to try and remember your questions. Alrighty, without further ado, let's watch Uncovering the Truth about dinosaurs.
Many strange creatures have walked this world of ours. Some have left it forever. Why did the great dinosaurs vanish? Was it a mass extinction? Were they wiped out by an asteroid? Or was it something else? Can science tell us what happened to them? Will we find our answers in the Bible? In this series, we'll look to both science and the Bible to help bring dinosaurs back to life, to find some answers to the many questions they have left us. Uncovering the truth about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and the flood. A French naturalist, Georges Cuvier, first came up with the idea of extinction way back in 1796. The idea was controversial at the time, but Cuvier theorized that a species could be driven extinct by catastrophic flooding. Now, he didn't say that the flood was the one from Genesis, but could it have been? Could the dinosaurs' downfall have begun with God's judgment of a wicked world? I'm Marcus Lloyd, and that's what we're going to try to find out. Imagine how the world looked when dinosaurs were around. It would have been even wetter and warmer then. And this would have been a tropical forest. You know, sometimes it's hard to even believe that dinosaurs existed. But they did, and they're gone now. A whole kind of animal vanished. What really happened to them? After the fall, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, death was introduced into the world. Some dinosaurs became carnivores, while others remained plant eaters, herbivores. And over the next 1,600 years or so, the world became increasingly evil, as the Bible tells us. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. God brought on a flood and spared only Noah and his family, and of course, of every living thing of all flesh, two of every sort. Except for those on the ark, countless dinosaurs and other animals were wiped out. Mainstream science says that mass extinction was brought on by an asteroid hitting the earth. Well, who's right? Dinosaurs are found in layers of rock creation scientists call systems. You've probably heard of the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. These are identified by the type of fossils found in them. Dinosaurs are almost exclusively found in these three systems.
The different rock layers that dinosaurs are found in are assigned ages by the secular world that go back millions of years. They talk about the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period, the Triassic period. As creationists, we like to use the word systems because we don't believe there are actually periods of time. These are all part of the flood record.
So each individual layer is huge, catastrophic, fast deposited, and they're all evidence of having been buried in water.
Now, something like the Triceratops behind me, it's got an interesting story to tell because the skull was found all by itself. It's found in the Lance Formation in Wyoming. It was isolated. There were no other Triceratops parts of the body nearby, so that tells us a little bit about its history. This is not the actual place where the Triceratops died. The Triceratops died somewhere else, and the head was separated from the body, moved and transported by sediments, water, and sand and mud until it came to rest. But it didn't come to rest sitting upright. Instead, it was almost upside down. It was tripoded on its horns sticking down in the frill in the back. Now, why would it be upside down? If we think of this as a skull that is being transported, the heaviest parts of the skull are the horns coming over the eye and the frill over the back of the head. And so as the water and sand mixture moves this skull, it rotates around upside down and plants itself down when the speed of the flow finally slows enough that the sediment can settle with the skull inside of it. So we've got a couple pieces of the story with a disembodied head and an upside down skull in a set of sediments far from where it started.
There's a consistent pattern of the water moving across continents, 1,000 feet or more above present sea level, a moving ocean over the continents, draping the continents with sediment from one shore to the other. Whoa, what do we got here? It seems to describe what the Bible is talking about. It talks about a global deluge in the days of Noah.
Secular scientists think that dinosaurs were eventually wiped out by 5 major extinction events, the last and most devastating event happening about 65 million years ago. Let's examine this theory.
So we've all heard the asteroid theory of dinosaur extinction. And according to this story, an asteroid or some kind of impact smashed into the Earth and created tsunamis and disrupted the crust in such a way that the dinosaurs went extinct. That's a story, and it has problems.
It's a story told by those who don't want to accept the biblical account. They say when the asteroid collided with Earth, it spread a layer of iridium over the planet. While creation scientists acknowledge the iridium, they question whether the asteroid was the source of it. Volcanic eruptions also distribute this element.
You need to pan back and see this is bigger than an asteroid. Something much bigger than an asteroid was necessary to kill all the life on the land, which is what the biblical flood did.
According to evolutionary thinking, this great catastrophic asteroid striking the Earth as being very selective, causing extinction of only the dinosaurs. And yes, of course, there were other animals that were killed, but it only seemed to kill the dinosaurs, not the extinction of the fish, not the extinction of the birds or any other groups of animals. Yes, there was a lot of death attributed to that, but only found within the Dinosauria. What is also significant is that evolutionists agreed to a worldwide extinction event. We attribute it to the flood of Genesis chapter 6 through 9.
Creation scientists say that the fossil record matches what you would expect to see from a worldwide flood. The low-lying places went under first, and the mountains flooded last.
So when you look at a sedimentary layer, some insist that the layer itself, the thickness of that layer, is a time indicator. But when they say that, they're asserting that this layer was deposited over lots of time. However, if you have enough water moving fast enough, the layer can be deposited in minutes. So it's not a time indicator. You just have to have a lot of water. The problem is, so many of us are not willing to think or conceive of that much water. But the Bible says the earth was covered with water. So if you have that much water sloshing around across the whole earth, you would have the conditions set up perfectly to make thick rock layers very fast.
Even the secular geologists will acknowledge nearly all of those rocks are water deposited, and they've got within them remains of billions of dead animals. And of course, that sounds very much like a flood, and they would argue that there's been flooding in Earth history, but they would claim that it never covered the entire surface of the Earth. So they're willing to allow for large floods, if you will, what they would call marine transgressions, where the water encroached onto the land, but they claim this happened over many millions of years, and it was never a global flood that covered the Earth's entire surface.
In the biblical account, the flood occurred in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month. The windows of heaven opened up and the rains fell for 40 days and 40 nights. Giant tears opened in the seafloor and the floodwaters rose and fell. But the flood didn't cover the land all at once. It gave time for creatures to get to higher ground. Gradually, the waters prevailed. According to Genesis, it covered all the hills and drowned all but the 8 humans and many animals on the ark. Secular paleontologists tell us that we find different types of dinosaurs in different layers because the extinction events are separated by millions of years. Creation scientists attribute it to the various stages of the flood.
The flood was probably a lot bigger than we can imagine as humans. We tend to think the flood was just a local flood a lot of times. A lot of people think the flood really didn't do that much. It was tranquil, but the flood was probably more devastating than anything else on Earth. It entirely destroyed the Earth. It was God's judgment on the Earth.
Many forms of life, both human and animals, perished as the entire planet was covered with water, even covering what were then the highest hills and mountains.
Geologically, we have plates moving during the flood rapidly, meters per second. We've got the continents kind of colliding with each other, making mountain ranges. All this stuff was going on in the 1 year of the flood. The flood wasn't just rain. It didn't just rain for 40 days. The flood went on for over a year before the animals got out of the ark. So all this upheaval and all this movement and all these mountains and the Himalayas, all this stuff formed in the flood. And we see evidence of that. We see flood sediments pushed way up into these mountains. Tremendous upheaval was going on in the earth. So there were probably dinosaurs that were alive pretty close for the first 100 to 120 days of the flood, maybe even longer. But by day 150, the Bible tells us everything was completely wiped out
everything that lived on land and breathed air died if it was not aboard the ark. Obviously, the second main thing that happened during the Genesis flood was that there were survivors, those who were aboard the ark, and of course, sea creatures that live in the ocean anyway. They didn't need to be on the ark. 8 humans survived, and representatives of all the creative kinds, whether that represents 16,000 animals or something less than that.
One thing that the secular world and the creation scientists agree on is there were floods of some sort in the geologic record. And one of the things that we agree on are these mega sequences where the water, apparently during the flood, came in big, huge packages of water and then probably receded a little bit.
Now, if you have a rock unit, say near the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and then you have another rock unit near the top, obviously the one near the bottom was formed first. And so we're not going to dispute that, but that's not the same thing as saying it was formed millions of years before this other rock unit. And there are actually clues, strong clues within the rocks themselves that these rock units were formed very rapidly and catastrophically, not slowly and gradually over millions of years as the evolutionists claimed.
And these clues are the fossils. Evolutionists say it takes long periods of time to make one. But is that really true? How are fossils made? You have to remember, not everything that dies becomes a fossil. In fact, fossilization is rare. Most dead plants and animals are usually eaten by scavengers or destroyed by bacteria. The things that are buried quickly in sand and mud, like in a flood or a landslide, have a better chance of becoming fossils. And animal soft tissues, that's skin and internal organs, usually rot away, even when buried, leaving only bones. As the material around a fossilized bone is cleared away by erosion, the fossil becomes exposed.
We see a pattern with dinosaur fossils. Why do they occur in some areas but not in others? And especially with the dinosaur footprints. They're along this dinosaur trackway that goes from North Texas and it swoops up on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains all the way to Canada. The flood may help answer that. Because if the flood waters are moving in, they're wiping out the last creatures to survive. The last creatures to survive are probably the hardiest. The ones that can be hit with water, can wade in that water. At the highest elevations during the flood year, maybe these dinosaurs were wading in water, and then during the tides, for example, the water would recede a little bit, and then the dinosaurs would have a place to step foot. And they were tracking their way in the highest elevations. So during the flood, we would have had water sloshing back and forth, and we would have had the conditions that set up for preservation of trackways and preservation of trackways in just the highest areas.
But the earliest ones, the Jurassic dinosaurs, are found on the fringes of what's called the Dinosaur Peninsula. Those dinosaurs are mostly all small. And then as the water went up higher, the next group of dinosaurs, the Jurassic system dinosaurs, were buried, and those include a lot of the sauropods. The sauropods, those big long necks, they were very big, but they couldn't really run, they couldn't trot away. And then later, as we go further to the north, as that peninsula is being flooded systematically kind of from south to north, we get up into Montana and Alberta and Canada, we see the huge herds of dinosaurs.
A lot of times, dinosaur fossils occur in what we call bone beds. And so these bone beds are packed with dinosaur fossils. And some of them are vast. There's one that was discovered recently in Alberta with just hundreds of Centrosaurus dinosaurs in a 1 by 1 square mile area. How did they get there? Floodwaters from a massive, catastrophic flooding event could bring in the mud that would bury this herd of Centrosaurs.
This is generally described as a river deposit. If it were truly a river deposit, you wouldn't be able to trace these beds for long distances. But we've been able to trace some of these beds over quite an extensive area. So this is an indication that these sediments are being deposited under deeper water. And that's a major change in our view of how the lands got deposited.
So the vast scale of carnage that we see in the rock layers indicates to us that there was a vast scale of power involved in their death. In addition, we see sea creatures buried with dinosaurs. We see clams, we see shark teeth, we see fish fossils, garfish scales. Well, what would we expect to see in the fossils if there was some kind of catastrophe that mixed sea with land, that brought ocean water up onto land or something like that? We might expect to see some ocean creatures, some estuary creatures mixed with swamp creatures, lowland areas. And that's exactly what we find in these dinosaur rock layers.
If you've ever been in the ocean, you know how you rise and fall with the waves. 1 second, your feet touch the bottom, and then a wave pulls you up. As you wade further out, you walk on your tiptoes until it becomes too deep, and then you have no choice but to swim. That's exactly what some dinosaur tracks show.
In many cases, the water levels were lapping up onto there, leaving fresh sediment, but not enough to wipe out the dinosaurs or kill the dinosaurs or bury the dinosaurs, just enough so they could leave a lot of footprints.
And so they're in shallow water, then the water gets deeper and deeper, and as the water rises, they're making claw marks. And then as the water lowers, they make deeper impressions, footprints. That's weird. How do you get that much water up on land? And then how do you get the water to flow and to rise and lower? And then how do you get these deposits to come in and lay down sand, lay down sediment, and in such a way that it's not too fast to tear up where they had just stepped, but it's fast enough to bring in sediment and deposit it right on their footprints to preserve them.
A couple other observations about the dinosaurs fit this global flood scenario. One is that when we first encounter the dinosaurs, let's say we're going through the layers of rock in the earth and looking for fossils, we don't find dinosaurs at the very oldest rocks. There's a certain point at which we find the first evidence of dinosaurs. Interestingly enough, when we find them, we find footprints. We don't find the bones, we don't find the bodies, we find footprints. Forensic pathology comes in. Why do we have footprints, not bodies? The flood makes a very nice explanation.
After the flood, it took months for the water to recede enough for Noah and his passengers to set down on dry land and begin fulfilling God's command to replenish the earth. Humans are still around, but dinosaurs didn't make it. What went wrong?
After the flood, when the dinosaurs embarked from Noah's Ark, and there was probably at least 60 or so pairs of dinosaurs that were brought on the Ark, these dinosaurs went off and had to reestablish their eggs and their nesting sites and reproduce like God instructed all the animals and the humans to do. But it appears dinosaurs did go extinct in the thousands of years after the flood.
So what happened to the dinosaurs that survived the flood and left the Ark? Well, they likely had clashes with humans, went through climate changes as extreme as the Ice Age, and had their habitats greatly reduced after the flood.
The post-flood world also started to go through a period of stabilization and kind of getting us to the point where we are today, where there's no longer an ice age. The ice had melted back across northern continents in North America and in Asia. And so things started to stabilize after the flood and to kind of get into this routine that we have today. Deserts formed in the Sahara. All these different environments started to work themselves out. Unfortunately, the dinosaurs don't appear to be one of those types of animals that were able to thrive after the flood.
So humans probably contributed to that, probably a great deal, but it was probably a gradual process. There's good reason to think that dinosaurs were alive for many years, many centuries after the flood, and there's even evidence that some of them may have survived even into the Middle Ages and beyond.
Each passing year brings exciting new finds about these fascinating creatures. But with each new discovery comes new questions. And the answers seem to come from the same place, the Bible. Recently, paleontologists have found blood cells, soft tissues, and remnants of dinosaur proteins. Now, these things should not have survived millions of years encased in rock. But that's another story for next time.
before we get into the whole conversation, I'd like to go ahead and read through the two key verses for today, both from Genesis. Someone want to read those out loud for us? Anybody? Oh, I got a hand right here. Okay, go ahead and read Genesis 6:7.
And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. Genesis 6:7.
You really gotta try to imagine how evil the world had to be for God to be sorry. That's a lot of evil. All right, who wants to read Genesis 7:17-21? It's a little bit longer section. You got that one?
Yeah.
Go for it.
For 40 days the flood waters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Genesis 7:17-21.
Alrighty. So that kind of sets you up, and that is the basis for a lot of what we've talked about tonight, or a lot of what we've seen in the video, is just that understanding of, if this is true, if Genesis is to be taken seriously, then you should find something in the Earth's geology. You should find something in the fossil record to reflect this. You couldn't just have a worldwide flood and have it go unnoticed. And so there is certain parts of Christianity, there's a lot of Christians who try and take a somewhere in between approach where they say, oh yes, I believe in God, but I also believe in evolution. And the issue with that is that if you look at the geologic column, if you look at the fossil record, and you say, well, this is evolution, this isn't the flood, then what you're left with is no flood. Does that make sense? The same thing you see in the ground that evolutionists are saying is proof of evolution is the same thing you'd expect to find if the world was covered by a flood. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, evolution was going on for millions and billions of years, and then eventually, humans came along, and eventually there was a flood, and then the rest of the Bible plays out. You can't have both. They're both looking at the same data, the same facts, and they're giving it a different explanation. Yeah.
Didn't they only have cubits back then?
Yes, this is a modern translation, so they're converting the cubit, and oddly enough, this is NLT, which means they only use short cubits. They don't use long cubits. So 22 feet would have been, let's see. 22 feet would have been 8. Is that how that works out? Because it should be 1.5.
1.5.
So it's 22 divided by 1.5. So it's like, wait, that doesn't work. Something's wrong. Okay, so it's like 14 2/3. That can't be right. If someone has an older translation, they can check it out and find the cubit number for me.
Wouldn't it be times 1.5, not divided?
Well, no, because we're going backwards. We're going from a foot to a cubit, not a cubit to a foot. Yeah. But anyways, the long cubit is 1.7. So it'd be basically 15 times 1.7. So it's like 25 feet, 25 and a half. So anyways, not a huge difference. Still a little under 30 feet. Did I answer your question? I can't remember what it was. Okay, good. All right, so yes.
Is there a significance by 22 feet?
Not that I know of. I think it's just showing that it didn't only cover it a little; it covered it with some excess. I don't know if there's really any significance to it. No, the arc is 30 cubits, so that'd be somewhere closer to 50 something feet tall. Like 50, 55 feet or something. So.
It could be close to the depth of.
Oh yeah. What's that called? How much a boat sits underwater?
Oh, the depth of the waist.
That might actually be relevant now that you mention it. That would mean the ark could not scuff the top. It would clear it. So yeah, there might be some significance to that. Good thinking. Okay. All right, so first question on our list here. Why do secular scientists think, what do secular scientists think happened to the dinosaurs? Give me some of the theories, because there isn't just one. I know there's like the most famous one. Yeah? Giant asteroid. That's pretty much the most famous one. And there's all the different effects that come from a giant asteroid. Interestingly, though, we don't find the actual crater or the giant asteroid. And that's a little weird. Does anyone remember any other ways that the dinosaurs would have been killed off. Because there's like 5 different extinction events they mentioned, not just the asteroid. Yeah? Say it again? Sandstorm? Maybe it's like a more localized one. I don't know. I haven't heard of it. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know everything. Maybe there's a worldwide sandstorm one or a dinosaur extinction sandstorm. I don't know that one. Yeah. Ice Age. Yes, that is another one of the extinction events. And that one, in secular science, it's theorized that there have been many ice ages throughout Earth's history. And in creation science, it's theorized there was just the one. And that actually does line up with just generic testable science as best as we can, because we can't induce an ice age anymore. That's not something humans have the ability to do. But we've run computer simulations, and computer simulations show all of the other proposed ways to get an ice age don't have the energy required. They don't have the amount of oomph required to put an ice age onto the whole planet. But a flood does. That's the weird thing, is that it can bleed off so much heat in a flood, the planet would get super cold, and then you would get ice age. Now, it wouldn't cover every speck of the Earth. It'd just be probably the southernmost third and the northernmost third. But again, that's based on computer simulation. So knowing whether or not that's absolutely true is really difficult. Yeah, Jeremiah.
The Silurians took them into
Oh
space.
my god. Yes, Jaden. Dare I?
Mass volcanic eruptions?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yes, that's another proposed cause. And what I think is interesting is that some of the things they propose are not outlandish. They're not impossible. But what we're talking about with the flood is not a purely water-covering Earth event. We're talking about huge upheaval in the crust as well. And so we would get volcanic eruptions. What is strange to me is that they blame all the iridium on asteroids when we get them from volcanoes. We get them from asteroids too, don't get me wrong, but they don't mention the volcanoes when they're talking about the extinction events bringing in iridium. They talk about the asteroid and how, therefore, creation science has it all wrong. But creation science has volcanoes in its story of the past as well, and you would get a ton of iridium from that. Yeah, again?
That's why I think the idea of Pangea is a very realistic one, because if you did have a worldwide flood, continental drift would happen, but it would happen extremely fast, because if you really think of a continental flood, it says that it was like 22 feet above the highest mountain, so imagine that, and then if it just kept crashing down, then it would create that continental drift. It would spread it would spread Pangea.
Well, and it would do something else too. It'd allow for the speed increase, because what you've got then is you've got fluid under the land masses, under the plates, and fluid above the plates. What that creates is a hyperbuoyancy. And so you can actually try this at home if you want. Take a styrofoam plate. So go get a styrofoam plate from the store, put it in a big, pool of water or in a bathtub or something, and then take as big a bucket as you can find and pour the water on. And the plate will not just sit between the new fluid and the old fluid. That's not what it's going to do. It's going to suddenly start moving just because you added fluid. And that's what we see in the tectonic plates, is that they're suddenly able to move, and yet they're not doing it anymore. That would be weird, except that much water would enable that. It would get that going. All right. Well, is this about that question, or is this something else? Just got to check. Question? This question?
Yes.
Okay.
How they got extinct.
Okay, go for it.
Human interactions.
Human interactions. I don't know if that's going to answer the question about secular scientists. I don't think the secular scientists think humans ever interacted with dinosaurs. But I think that's a good answer if you're following the Bible's timeline. The Bible's timeline would suggest, at the very least, it's possible for post-flood humans to interact with dinosaurs. And I think at that point it's likely then. Because humans like to hunt. And what cooler game to hunt than giant lizards? It just seems like human nature. Yeah, Cody. Oh, that was yours. Okay, good job. And then with creation science, did you have one? Go for it.
So if secular scientists feel that it was a meteor that caused it, where has it been identified that it hit the Earth?
It hasn't. And so that's kind of the idea, is we have a lot of big meteors. We have a lot of meteors still hitting us. And so we kind of have a feel for what size meteor would create what size crater. And so when we look and find the biggest craters we can, and that's not to say we found all the craters that have been buried through the years, but the biggest ones we can find don't suggest a dinosaur killing size meteor. And so we are lacking in that department. We haven't found a meteor that would fit the narrative of wiping out, species across the entire planet.
Isn't there like a crater in Mexico that's like miles across.
Yeah, but to get a mile across crater, you don't need a mile across meteor. And a mile across crater can throw up a lot of dust, but you can actually measure how much dust that would be by the size of the crater, the thickness, the depth of the crater. And so then you can do some simulations using physics to determine like how far that can spread before it would dissipate. And it doesn't even cover the entire northern hemisphere of America, let alone South America, let alone the other sides of the planet. So even in its worst case of what we have found, it wouldn't wipe out all the dinosaurs on the planet because it wouldn't affect the whole planet. So yeah, we are lacking in that department, and it's not really something that seems to sway the secular scientists. They're just thinking, well, it has to have happened that way, so therefore we'll find it one day. Yeah.
Super anti-dino virus.
Super anti-dino virus. You know, it has been theorized, and obviously most living tissue, even from a few thousand years ago, doesn't survive. And so we haven't found it. But yeah, it's a reasonable assumption. If they all died out and it's a bit of a mystery, or we don't know all the causes, a virus that hits large reptiles could totally be legit. We don't have a lot of their working systems, and so it's hard to say yet whether or not a dino virus would affect reptiles or wouldn't. Does that make sense? We don't really know yet how different they were from lizards, from crocodiles, from all those other reptiles. We know some differences. Say again?
Are crocodiles dinosaurs?
Loosely, but they don't actually fit the terminology in the scientific sense.
What about Komodo dragon?
No, it's which sheet was it on? I think it was sheet 1, so week 1. It actually has the list on the back where we give like crazy stupid amounts of detail, and it has to do with like certain bone spurs. It has to do with the kind of hip it has. It has to do with dinosaurs characteristically don't drag their bellies and tails on the ground. They have downward limbs that help them to walk quicker, whereas crocodiles, alligators, they drag their belly, they drag their tail. And then they have to be land dwelling, whereas crocodiles, they can come on land. It's not like that'll kill them because they're reptiles, but they're water dwelling. And so dinosaurs aren't actually water dwellers and they don't fly. Those are different classifications. Flying reptiles have their own classification, and they're not dinosaurs technically.
Wait,
Technically, I know. I'm sorry to burst you guys' bubble. That was week 1. Week 1, we found out dinosaurs only include the land-dwelling group. That word only includes them. We have other words for flying reptiles. We have other words for aquatic or marine reptiles, but it's not dinosaur. That's not the word. That's interesting. So pterodactyls aren't that different from dinosaurs, and that's the weird part. I think they should just all be called dinosaurs. But what they're getting into is the taxonomic system, and the word dinosaur came when the taxonomic system wasn't like fully developed, and so they were all called dinosaurs, and then they started developing the system further, and then they're like, oh, you're not called dinosaurs anymore. Kind of Pluto-y, it's called a planet. Now it's not called a planet anymore. It doesn't fit our new classification. As we find out more about them, the classification doesn't fit anymore. Same idea. All right, yeah.
I've heard some people say that one of the reasons they believe that an asteroid hit the Earth and that's how the dinosaurs went extinct was because of the Gulf of Mexico. They think that that's...
The whole Gulf is the crater.
Yeah, pretty
I
much.
have heard about that,
They
yeah.
think that that's the crater, and they've done simulations of it, like on computers, and apparently it would create a big enough dust cloud to cover a lot of the Earth, but not all of it, and the dust cloud would kind of be like when Mount St. Helens erupted. It would be a lot of like just a bunch of dust and like cinders and stuff, and it would be very hard to breathe, but it would not necessarily kill you.
Well, and we would have to figure out what the asteroid was made out of, and then they're probably doing reverse detective work to figure that out, like what's in the Gulf of Mexico sediment.
They actually usually have ice in the center, and not like magma.
Which just increases the explosion, actually. You have ice in the center and then you get superheated, that causes things to expand rapidly and explode. It's fun to think about. Alright, so, next question, number 2 on your sheet. What are the 2 conflicting views on rock layer formation? This is pretty easy if you were listening. It's not a long answer question.
Oh, wait, what? Sorry.
What just happened?
She was looking at this side and couldn't find questions.
There's no numbers on that side.
I thought
That was
her problem. What's the problem?
Well, that would work. Okay, yeah. There are actually page numbers. I just had to fit so much text on these sheets. They're up here under the word donuts. It's up under the word donuts. It says page 1 and page 2. I couldn't fit it anywhere else. There's no space in the margin on the bottom right. Yeah. Is that George Lopez? It's George's. I'm not sure if I can say his last name right because it's French. It's Cuvier?
I don't know.
It looks like Cuvier.
That's what I'm saying.
But I don't speak French.
But the S
so
looks like it would be S.
Someone's free to correct me on that if they speak French. I speak Georges Cuvier.
Cuvier.
Yeah, it was a little Spanish. That's not him. No, that's him.
This dude is super excited.
He's one of the scientists alive. He was in the video.
And he was super excited in this video.
He's the guy who says global deluge.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, he was so excited.
All right, calm down. So, back to question 2. What are the 2 conflicting views of rock layer formation? Yes.
Alright, this is not about this,
Oh my goodness. I've been tricked.
You know how we're
You can
talking
ask your
about
question. Go for it.
Leviathan the other day?
Yeah, we're talking about Leviathan.
Well, I just got another idea. You know how it says it hides in the reeds?
Yeah.
It would have to be a water and land animal, and crocodiles can go in either. And then haven't they found like larger crocodiles?
Haven't they found larger crocodiles? Oh, but it eats grass.
So do crocodiles. So it's a cow, just like a dog.
Dogs eat grass and get sick.
Dinosaurs up in like.
Dogs don't eat grass. Dogs consume grass to vomit. I just mean, if I was going to describe a crocodile to you guys, I wouldn't focus on his grass-based diet. I would focus on how he takes your leg off. Does that make sense? If I was going to describe dogs, I wouldn't describe, that they live in backyards. I'd describe how they hunt in packs. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you talk about the characteristic of the dog, not what someone does to it, not what happens occasionally. All right, anyway. But good thought, nonetheless. Good thought. Yes. I must have forgot I said that. I'm sorry. Someone got their phone on them. You guys want to look it up for me? I'm sorry. Remember how we were saying dinosaurs only cover the land ones, and it doesn't cover marine or flying? What is the word, the technical word, for all the flying reptiles and all the marine reptiles?
You didn't know it that night.
Well, he's saying I said I'd look it up, and I just forgot I said I'd look it up. I'm sorry. Anyways, they're going to look it up for you. Yeah.
I like how you said, if you have a phone, pull it out, but all our phones are in one.
That's a true point.
Their phones aren't.
Leaders.
Yeah, leaders. Whatever, leaders. All right.
I think everybody knows now.
So we never got an answer to question 2. What are the...
Pterodactyl is actually the word for...
You're messing with me. That's the group?
Pterodactyl.
Pterosaurs, yeah.
Pterosaurs. There we go. So dinosaur, pterosaur. And then do we know about the marine ones? No, it's not spelled that way. It's spelled a P. Yeah. It's a patera. Sorry? Oh, you're messing with me. Sorry, guys. Sailor's trying to tell me what the answer is. I can't hear him.
It's a Spinosaurus.
Spinosaurus?
It's the only dinosaur we know that spent time living in the water.
But that's a dinosaur. Spinosaurus is a dinosaur. It's a land-dwelling dinosaur that spends large amount of time in water. That's not a marine reptile. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. It might just be marine reptile. We'll see. But it's pterosaur. That's pretty cool because it's like pterodactyl. That's not that hard to remember.
It's a pterosaur.
Guys, the guy who asked the question cannot be heard because you guys are all talking. Sorry. There probably is multiple kinds of pterosaurs that all start with ptera. That would be my guess. I don't have them all memorized, so I can't answer that off the bat. Yeah?
I know somebody that's materia, but
That's
I'm dinosaur.
It's not even. It's not. Nope. Not even where we're going with that. Okay. Does anyone at all remember the 2 different views of the formation of the rock layers? Yes.
Creationists believe that the layers are deposited quickly, and evolutionists believe that the layers
Okay. So, and this brings up a different question. This is not one they covered in the video. This is just me trying to think things through, trying to be as logical as I can possibly be. So, any archaeologist, any paleontologist worth their salt will be able to tell you about how fossils form. And we checked it out last week. There's like all these different kinds of fossil formations. You can have carbonization, and you can have the normal mineralization. There's several other kinds. But they all have some things in common, and that's that the portion of the specimen that gets fossilized has to all be buried simultaneously. So if you have a specimen, if you have a dinosaur or a leaf or a human foot, and it gets buried in part, it only gets part buried, then the part that is buried has the opportunity to fossilize, and the part that is not buried, right, the part that doesn't get buried does not have the opportunity. It won't get fossilized. This is why we don't just find billions of footprints the world over, because honestly, think about that. Dinosaurs didn't only just walk from Texas to Canada one time. Like, that's illogical to think that was like the only time dinosaurs ever walked, and every other dinosaur just stood in place and never ever moved. But that's where we find the most footprints. Why is that? Well, because footprints don't fossilize all the time. You step in some sand, I mean, think about it on the beach. Water comes by, boom, footprint's gone. You know, you step in some mud in your backyard, it rains, boom, footprint's gone. So I mean, there's all these situations where footprint comes and goes, never gets fossilized, where bones can even get buried in the wrong kind of soil. They don't get fossilized. And so fossils only form under very specific circumstances. The moisture in the soil has to be right, all the amount of soil has to be right, and we find tons of these dinosaurs, and it's the whole dinosaur. So think about that for a second, about the size of the dinosaur. Now, obviously, many dinosaurs are small. Most dinosaurs are the size of like a bison, you know, like a really big cow. But think about like full Brontosaurus getting buried all at once. That's not just slow millions of years creeping up soil. Does that make sense? For every dinosaur you've ever seen in a museum that was huge, it had to be buried all at once. Now, obviously, it wasn't standing when it was buried, okay? I'm not suggesting the dirt falling on it had to be, 20 feet tall. But what I'm saying is, if its rib cage is, 6 feet wide or whatever, that means 6 feet of soil just went boom, across that whole animal. That's a crazy thing to think about if every dinosaur had to experience that, and yet every layer was deposited slowly. That means for every dinosaur, we're looking at another local flood, another local flood, another mudslide, another mudslide, another local flood, another mudslide, another local flood, another mudslide, like that's a lot of floods and mudslides. Again and again and again. That's a very strange thing when one of the other tenets of evolution is that things are just happening the way they've always been happening. Things just keep on going the way things keep on going. But we don't see that today. We don't see people dying in mudslides getting fossilized all the time. We don't see animals getting fossilized all the time. It's super duper rare.
Are there any Japanese fossils?
Is there what?
Japanese fossils after all the tsunamis and earthquakes?
Oh, that's a good question.
Fossils have ethnicity.
I don't know. It still takes several years to make a good fossil. He just meant because Japan suffers more tsunamis than a lot of other places on the planet. And so they would get that frequent washover. Other places on the planet wouldn't, but Japan does. He's totally right. I don't know. I've never looked into that. That's a really good thought we should look at. Yeah, Jeremiah.
So you know how you were talking about like the standards for a planet changing?
Yes.
Did you hear about Pluto? That's messed up, right?
Poor Pluto.
It's
All right.
making
Okay. Let's move on to a new question. Does anyone remember the 3 rock systems that contain the most dinosaurs? Yes.
Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic.
Yeah, it's good. She knows the sound of them. It's really hard to when it comes down to it, how many of us can spell them all properly?
Oh gosh.
Not as many of us as should be able to spell them all properly. So it's Cretaceous. Cretaceous. But good try. I know, the other ones have like the S's and the T's, and it's all over the place. Triassic, oh now you got me. And then Jurassic. Not in that order. Alright. Yes.
They're mostly found in rock.
Say that again?
They're mostly found in rock.
Yes. Well done, sir.
Good job, Alex.
Alex is on his A game tonight. All right. Can anybody think of one of the evidences mentioned in the video of a global flood? Obviously, we find lots of evidence of flooding. That's undisputed. Every evolutionist believes that. Every creation scientist believes that. There's tons of evidence of flooding. That's not in question. But can anyone remember one of the evidences for a global-sized flood? Yeah,
that like the rock sediments are being shaved off, like not as slow as they thought, but like it takes a lot of water to shave them down that fast, and they have been shaved down that fast.
Okay, that was actually mentioned, I think, multiple weeks ago, or was that this week? And I missed it.
This week as well.
Oh, there was a moment where I was with Jane and I wasn't watching, so I'm bad. Yeah, there's some interesting cases where, not with the Grand Canyon, but with other canyons, we've actually watched them form in a matter of days. And they have the same look as the Grand Canyon. They're not quite as large, because what we're talking about is a release of water nowadays that's man-made. It's like a dam going, or suddenly some erosion gets too bad and we couldn't stop it in time, and a lake just loses its shoreline and goes downhill. Like literally, the lake goes downhill. And what we end up seeing is riverbeds that were just streams, trickles before, they suddenly get carved straight down into the earth, widened a good deal too, but they look just like the Grand Canyon, and they happen in days. Just as a lake lets go and just flows downstream. And so when you look at floodwaters, you would actually get some crazy stuff, like glacier-contained bodies of water, like huge giant lakes that are very precariously set up because they were only there as the floodwaters receded. Anybody else have any other examples of global flooding? Yeah, Ezra.
Seashells on Mount Everest?
Yeah, finding underwater creatures up on the tops of mountains. And it's not just Mount Everest, too. It's lots of mountain ranges. You dig down into the soil and you find sea creatures, which doesn't make sense under a lot of circumstances, except the mountain getting formed rapidly.
Wait, the mountain was made?
The mountain had to be made rapidly. So think about this for a second. If you have ocean floor, okay, then the mountain would form, and where would it be located? Okay, so how did you get Mount Everest not in the ocean?
It left the ocean?
No, it had to start not in the ocean. That's essentially how it works. In the middle of a landmass, so it started in the middle of a landmass. So this mountain was formed out of a landmass being pressed up. So the sea creatures weren't there from the mountain being in the sea. The sea creatures were there from the sea being on top of the mountain.
Oh, that's...
Does that make sense?
I thought you meant that Mount Everest came out of the ocean. God was like, come on.
That would be impressive. I'm sure it's possible, but no, it's much less likely. Much less likely. More likely is what we see all over the planet, which is sea creatures mixed in every single fossil layer. That doesn't make sense unless it's all ocean water floods.
Like, you know the little spiral things?
Yeah.
I've seen a rock layer where like, this is the Triassic, this is this, right? But they're in every single one.
Yeah.
And they're all the same. There's no change.
No.
Like,
We actually do see that most of the time when we have instances of a creature who's been fossilized at the deepest layers that are still alive, that didn't die out. They look identical. There's some DNA differences because, they've been breeding and having babies for thousands of years, but they haven't actually been modified past what they used to look like. The kind of differences we're talking about is like, their arms are a little bit longer. And that's like from the deepest layers. That's the amount of evolution that's occurred since the deepest fossil layers is like a little longer tail, slightly longer legs. They lost their fourth antenna or something. I don't know. At this point, I'm making it up. But that's how. But that's how little change we see. Horseshoe crabs are a really good example of that. Horseshoe crabs are one of the scariest looking alien, freaky underwater thing you've ever seen. It looks like something out of an alien horror film. It really does. They don't look like crabs at all. They really don't. Horseshoe crab. It's a crab, but it's got like a head that's perfectly rounded, like the edge of a horseshoe. It's got a tail like a stingray shooting out the back, and it's got little scuddly crab legs that are completely under its body. So like you can't even see its legs until you flip it over, and then it's all.
So it's like this?
Yeah. And it's got spikes off the back besides the tail too. It's
creepy.
I don't even know. They don't usually wash up. They're pretty deep sea creatures. Occasionally they wash up.
Are they still alive?
Oh yeah, they're still alive. But they haven't changed. That's the point. Horseshoe crabs from supposed millions of years ago are identical to horseshoe crabs today. Every now and then they'll wash up on shore. It's pretty rare.
It's a monkey.
Alright. One of the cool things I found out, they blurbed it in the video. Do you guys remember when they said the Dinosaur Peninsula?
Yes.
Anyone catch that phrase?
Yes.
I had never heard of the Dinosaur Peninsula, and so I looked this up. This is really interesting. If you go through the history of the Cretaceous period from a secular viewpoint, so assuming millions and millions of years, the proposition is that during the Cretaceous layer, there is huge amounts of evidence that America was underwater, but not all of it. Just the middle portion. So it would have come up from like the Gulf of Mexico, and it would have stretched up towards the Canadian border. And so you would have this huge piece of water coming up, and California, most of Nevada, all that, that'd be underwater too. And so we see this in the Cretaceous layer, huge evidence to suggest that the water level was up that high for pretty much all of the Cretaceous layer. And so you see like just this peninsula coming down, basically where the modern day Rockies are. Whether the Rockies were there or not is up for debate. It looks like they weren't though, because what we have is layers that do this through the Rockies and then go back flat again. And layers don't form properly like that when it's multiple turning the same corners together. When you have like 4 and 5 layers all turning corners, that means they were laid down flat and then stretched. So the Rockies would have still been a higher area on the map, even pre-flood, but they wouldn't necessarily have been the Rockies. They wouldn't have been peaked mountains necessarily. So it's kind of cool that as you look through secular science, what you're actually finding in these layers, if the timeline doesn't work, if it's not millions of years, then the evidence that's left, the evidence that's actually in the rocks, is that, yeah, during this period where a ton of dinosaurs were fossilized, America was going underwater. That's in the fossil layer, and that's actually in a lot of your guys' textbooks. If you can find the chapter on dinosaurs and you find the chapter on Cretaceous period, you may actually find an illustration of the Dinosaur Peninsula and the flooding that covers most of America during the Cretaceous period. Yeah.
But there were.
It's kind of off topic, but like, why don't they find like human fossils next to dinosaur fossils?
It's a really good question. So think about, first off, how fast the flood happens. Flood happens, waters fall 40 days, right? How long does it take a town to evacuate if the ocean's rising?
2 hours.
Dude, if the ocean's rising, I'm just gone. And this is really what it comes down to. We actually see in the fossil record a very clear indication of intelligence. We see in the layers that get laid down first, the first land animals are the stupid animals. I'm not joking. That's literally what we see. The first layers of animals are the stupid animals. And the further you go up in the layers, the smarter the animals get. That's literally what you find in the rock layers. And so what do you find towards the end? Humans. Because a human isn't going to look at the ocean rising and go, Noah was stupid. I don't believe Noah. A human's going to look at the ocean and go, that Noah guy, he was onto something. And get the heck out of town. Now, not obviously did everybody know Noah. I'm just trying to make a joke out of it. But humans aren't going to be dumb enough to watch the ocean rise and just sit there. You might watch it rise a bit and sit there. You might even watch it rise over the first few barricades and come spilling into your town and go, wow, this is crazy. But eventually, at some point, the human's going to go, I'm going to die, and leave. And so we don't really find them in the lower layers. So, and that makes sense when you look at even the animals follow that exact same pattern. Even the animals follow that exact same pattern.
Well, if humans are the smartest, then they should have been riding brachiosauruses. True. Like if there's a fossil of a human,
just get a lasso and
evolution is done. God should have that by now.
Dude, can you imagine if we dug up a brontosaurus and it was fossilized with a human straddling its neck?
That'd be great.
Or better yet, like a triceratops.
I can see that. I can see the headline. Flintstones was right. All right. Yes.
Really, the only evidence of life was what was buried in the soil during the flood.
Yeah.
And what lived on the ark.
That would be it. Yeah.
So doesn't that substantiate the Genesis theory?
It does. Substantiate is a word that people don't want to even approach, though, because if they're precluding God, then the story doesn't work. If God doesn't force this flood, we have to find naturalistic, slowly churning mechanisms that would cause a flood of this magnitude. And so once someone has ruled God out, then everything is poppycock that comes from it. And so even if you interpret the data differently and it makes sense, the starting point was something they couldn't accept. And so generally, a creation scientist is never given the opportunity to make something like a substantiating claim. That's not allowed, because they're assuming a supernatural premise. And a supernatural premise basically says to a secular scientist, you aren't a scientist. You are precluded from the conversation. And that's sad. That's sad, because science is meant to explore all avenues. And if the supernatural avenue makes the most sense scientifically, it should be explored. It shouldn't be ignored. Philosophy is a little more open. Philosophy, it kind of comes down to a 50-50. Either the universe is eternal or there's something outside the universe that's eternal. And so philosophers can kind of basically say, these are the only two options, and we'll at least consider the option of something outside the universe that is eternal. But in science, they're not willing to accept anything that isn't a natural cause. And that's sad, because that's not how science started. Science started with, generally speaking, people who believed in God, whether it was in the Christian area of the world or it was in the Muslim area of the world. It was people who believed in a creator who ordered things according to his will. And so they decided to look out into the cosmos to explore creation because they wanted to see what God was like. And that's what spurred on the first scientists, was the idea that I get to study my creator through his creation. And then along the way that gets lost. But yeah, it's a bummer that's hard to reverse. And the only way I can think of to reverse it is what a lot of creation scientists are doing. Just keep doing the science, and say, who cares? Who cares if only some people listen? Who cares if most of my peers say I'm crazy? Just do good science. And the record will stand, the books will be written and they'll stay in the archives, and then maybe someday people will actually take them seriously. But for now, keep doing good science. And yeah, it's a sad place to be. Alright, yes? It's a really good question. So we actually do have ways now of studying brain cavities and figuring out basics of how smart a species is. It's not a given, it's not an automatic, but there's different parts in the brain, and based on the inside of the skull, you can tell which parts are more developed and which parts are less developed. And certain parts of the brain are more used when you are doing reflexive things. Like if someone touches a fizzling match that was just lit to your skin, you have a reaction. So there's parts of the brain that do that, and there's other parts of the brain for us that control personality. There's parts of the brain that control speech. There's parts of the brain for all these different tasks. And so when you look not just at the size of an animal's brain, but you look at the different portions of the skull cavity that are given to the different portions of the brain, then you can start to tell what the animal would be good at and what the animal would be bad at. From there, we're generalizing when we say intelligence, because intelligence isn't just one thing. So a parrot is intelligent, and it can actually talk. But a dolphin is considered to be more intelligent, but it can't talk.
Well,
Is that-
actually they can't.
Well, I mean mimic speech, sorry. Mimic speech. And then we have things like octopuses. Octopuses can figure out riddles blind.
Wait.
No, that's actually not true. It's both. Look it up.
A what?
Octopi, octopuses, they're both true. Octopi is actually less correct, though.
No, but you said
There's
that it
also
can figure out a riddle blind?
It can figure out a riddle blind, a physical riddle, a puzzle.
Okay.
Like
I was
picking
like,
a lock.
Wait, what do you mean? Because it does not
You put the Reader's Digest in front of the pen.
Got it.
No. No, I mean like a lock, a puzzle, a scenario that is difficult to understand. They can figure it out without looking at it.
I believe it.
That's cool.
That is they're pretty good.
I can't, guys. He's asking a question. I can't even hear what he's saying. You're right. It doesn't, because we've been raised to believe it's octopi.
But it's not a mind instead of a moon.
Whoa. Okay. Now you're assuming the English language makes sense.
Well, I know it.
That's mistake one.
I'm working first grade and we have to teach it. We know that it doesn't.
Alright, Alex had his hand raised a long time
I
ago.
forgot what I was going to say. 'cause I got
I'm
somebody.
sorry. Alright guys, we only have 8 minutes left. Let's double check, see if any of these are super important. I'll answer 5 for you because this is good to know. Floods and mudslides. Floods and mudslides. Volcanoes, sometimes, but it's got to be like a really specific setup with the volcano. Not all volcanoes are going to make you a fossil. A lot of them just spew lava and burn you to a crisp. No real fossils there. But yeah, mudslides and floods are your primary catastrophes for making fossils. And we kind of mentioned number 7. So yeah, we can just do whatever questions you guys have come up with or thoughts or whatever your hand was raised for. Do you remember yours?
No.
Cody.
He said octopuses can solve riddles blind.
Yes. Did you miss that one? It was kind of noisy. It's not necessarily your fault. Yeah, I mean like a lock or a puzzle, or it's a physical riddle. I may have misspoken if I say riddle because that in my head sounds like a puzzle, but it's probably not what everyone else thinks of when I say riddle. Yeah, dogs can talk. Dogs can talk as well. Some dogs have been actually trained to make speech-like noises. You are correct. But I meant mostly like with a parrot, it has like the innate ability. All it needs to do is hear it and it can learn it. You don't have to like teach a parrot to talk, you just have to give it something to mimic. Does that make sense? Like a little bit different. And like dolphins all communicate with each other. It's like they already have speech built in. But yeah, you're right. A dog can be trained to say things like what a human says. And it even has attached meaning to the word. But that's not necessarily like the same as saying dogs listen to humans enough and they start talking. Does that make sense? Like, they can do complete sentences. Like, those are different things.
Complete sentences?
Yeah, dogs are smart. You are correct. Dogs are smart. Yeah. Hey guys, it's meant to be a group conversation, not a group who's having conversations. Does that make sense?
That was weird.
So, if you would like to join the conversation, raise your hands, jump on in, cut someone off if you have to, but make it something that's worth everybody hearing, and try and just for the next 6 minutes, if you can have that amount of self-control, keep the private little jokes and giggles and other things that you were only going to say to one person to,
Yourself.
5 minutes from now. Alright, you had your hand up.
Are Komodo dragons dinosaurs or dragons?
Oh, good question! Okay, I would say neither. The name is,
What's dragon?
what's the word?
That does not mean it's a dragon.
There's a word when you misname something on purpose. It's a misnomer. Who said misnomer?
It has the exact
Good job. Yeah, Komodo dragon's a misnomer. It's not really a dragon. It's not a dinosaur either. It wouldn't fit the classification. Dinosaurs hold their tails off the ground and they hold their bellies off the ground. So right there, you know it's not a dinosaur.
What if it grows wings?
Flying things are pterosaurs. Remember we covered that. They're not dinosaurs.
Well, but then it would be a dragon.
Yeah. It shoots fire.
I guess that depends on what mythology of dragons you're looking at, though. The idea behind the Dinos, Dragons, Donuts is not that all dragons existed, not that dragons, the way mythology talks about them, existed, but rather that mythology that has got common threads over the course of the entire planet has to have roots in something. Roots in something. And so the idea is not that dragons, the way we've seen them in stories, the way we've seen them in mythology, ever existed necessarily. The idea is that they all had to come from some common experience. And so the theory is people experienced dinosaurs. Then as dinosaurs die out, there's no factual basis to go back to. There's no concrete what a dinosaur is really like left over anymore. And so then that's when myth starts to take over, because you don't have actual dinosaurs around to show you what a real dinosaur is like. You can just basically say whatever you want. But you do have a creature that everyone knows certain details about. What shape they were, what size they were, whether they ate meat or whether they eat veggies. Those kinds of things people still remembered, and they can just kind of build off that and create their own dinosaurs from that point on. And so you do see in some cultures the dragons look very dinosaurish. Other cultures, not really even. A lot of Asian dragons bear little to no resemblance to dinosaurs. Whereas other countries in Asia actually do have very, very dinosaur-shaped dragons. But other ones have things that look nothing like a dinosaur. And so what you have to try and figure out is, if this makes sense, the ones that look more like dinosaurs should be older. And if this makes sense, the ones that don't look like dinosaurs should be newer. They should be more modern, or still evolving. The mythology keeps going. You know, the mythology was never broken. And that's actually what we do find. When we dig up the mythology in archaeology, and it was buried for thousands of years, those dinosaur myths look a lot more like dinosaurs. When we don't have to dig and we just go talk to people who believe in dragons, they look nothing like dinosaurs, or less like dinosaurs. And so when you give the myth more time to build, it gets further and further from the real thing. That actually does make sense. All right, any other hands? Yeah.
So they're called pterodactyls, right?
Pterosaurs. Pterodactyl is a pterosaur. Pterosaur is the category.
So wait, they're named in Latin, right?
Pretty sure.
Most of them are. There's always exceptions.
Terra means earth or land.
She already mentioned that. That's when it's spelled starting with a T. This starts with a P. The Terra in pterodactyl is PT.
P-R-Y.
It's stupid, but it is. And I don't know the Latin root for that. We can look that up. It might not even be Latin. Occasionally some words sneak in there that aren't Latin, but most scientific designations are Latin. When you see an exception, the exception is usually a piece or a whole of the discoverer's name. That's the usual exception in the naming of taxonomy, you know, classes. So families, genuses, species, all that stuff. Usually when there's that exception, it's just the guy's last name, or his girlfriend's name, or his kid's name, or it's his dog's name. I mean, like, they can basically name it whatever they want, but sometimes they stick to Latin because their friends will like them better. Their scientist friends will like them better for sticking to Latin. Yeah?
How can you tell if dragon or dinosaur ate meat or plants?
Ooh, good question. You can't. You can only tell if it likely ate meat or plants. And then in some cases you can tell absolutely, but it's rare. We've had certain fossilized dinosaurs with stomach contents that were fossilized along with it. But it's really, really, really rare for that to happen. And so there's only certain species where we're like 100% this is absolutely what it is.
So like if a dinosaur ate a fish and it fossilized,
You'd find a fish in its stomach. Cool. Now we know it ate fish. But that doesn't happen very often. It's really rare. Because it would have to be a dinosaur that was fossilized right after a meal. Otherwise, if the dinosaur's been running for its life from floodwaters, it will have had time to poop its pants.
You mean they don't have
And it was also afraid enough.
You know that.
So then there won't be any stomach contents. Likewise, if it's even gone on for a few hours since it ate, the stomach will start to digest that stuff. And so then it will be less hardy, less likely to survive the fossilization. Think about the dinosaur itself. The dinosaur itself, the only part that usually survives is the bones. Everything else gets stripped away in the process. And that's because everything else on the dinosaur isn't as hardy, it's not as sturdy, it's not as strong. And so it doesn't survive in the dirt long enough to get encased and for the dirt to form kind of a concrete-ish layer, and then for the minerals to seep in and start replacing things. So usually when you find stomach contents, it's because of very weird circumstances. So like fish would make sense, but fish have really soft bones. And so digestive systems will just kind of melt those down. If it's a dinosaur that usually eats fish, it'd be equipped for that. So you wouldn't find it as often. Now, a lot of people put the teeth as like the key determiner of what an animal eats. Like if it has this kind of tooth, then that's what it eats. If it has this kind of tooth. Well, and that's kind of the problem, is that there's too many exceptions. Because of all the exceptions, you can't say the rule always holds. But there is far more species that stick to the rule than there are exceptions, so you can say that we are mostly sure this sharp-toothed dinosaur ate meat, or we're mostly sure this flat, grinding-toothed dinosaur ate plants. And you can say that with a very good degree of certainty, but we also have to know there's going to be exceptions. Just like today there's bears that only eat bamboo and they still have bear teeth.
What?
Like that's weird. They still have bear teeth. Their teeth don't look especially bamboo shaped or something.
But they eat people too.
Well, if you make them angry.
I've seen a bear eat a person.
I'll take a bite out of you if you get on my bad side. That doesn't make me a people eater. Alright, it's about time to end. You got a killer one, go for it.
Introduction to Pterosauria.
Oh, thank you, good.
Ranging from the size of a sparrow to the size of an airplane, the Pterosaurus, Greek for wing lizard,
So Terra probably means wing.
and it's Ptero, it's P-T-E-R-O, so it's not even Terra, which would lead to T-E-R-R-A.
Which gets us the
So
confusion.
it's completely...
There's different nouns for
together, there are.
But it's Greek.
Oh, it's Greek.
And that was kind of my point. I couldn't say off the top of my head.
Well, there's different
Latin
forms of Greek.
because I don't know. Well, we can check into it. We can get real specific. But again, this isn't like
Sounding like it's
the dinosaurs were
Greek.
born and growing up with the designation Taro over their head, knowing this. This is just what we're calling them. So it's whatever we decided it was. It doesn't have to make perfect sense. We just named them that. All right. So, thank you, Autumn. Alrighty. If you guys have more questions, you're welcome to stick around late, but we're going to pray, and you guys can move on if you would like to move on. So let's pray. Like I said, if you have questions, just stick around.
I like
But
church.
we-
That's it.
That's okay, good. All right, let's pray. Lord, we just ask that you would use this study, help us to draw close to you, to remove barricades, help us to look into science and not be afraid, to look into science and know that you're real. And so science, if we do it well, if we do it right, if we do it without bias, is going to lead us back to you. It's going to substantiate your story. It's going to show that what you've put down in your word is correct. Help us, Lord, to have faith enough to check, though. And also, Lord, to be prepared enough that when someone tells us something that can slam our faith, that can dash it on the rocks, that we have enough stored up science, if we have enough knowledge of your world, that we can stand strong. That we can refute those lies, that we can at least dig in and figure out, well, where is the truth in that statement? Is it all lie or is it part lie? Lord, we don't want to be shaky Christians. We don't want to be fragile. We want to be strong. And so we just ask, Lord, that through this and through whatever else you've got for us, that we would draw close to you and stay close to you. Help us to ask our questions and not just sit on them and wonder what if. Help us, Lord, to get our answers and to get true wisdom from you. We ask all that in your name, Jesus. Amen.